everybody. Sorry for that. We're going to get started today talking about alterations and relocations of a watercourse. It's something that is continuing to come up in communities across the state. There's a lot of confusion on what needs to be done versus what doesn't need to be done. And so we're going to kind of go over some of the regulations. We're going to go over some situations that we've had in the past, and then we'll also talk about some final thoughts as you move ahead with your floodplain management duties and responsibilities. So thank everyone for joining today. We'll get started here. One thing to keep in mind, if you have questions, just put them in the chat box, and then as we go forward, we'll have that. So I have two of my engineering friends helping me today. I have Patrick McMahon. Did I say it right?
Good, thanks.
I did. I said it right. Yay.
That's Dr. McMahon.
Yay. And then we also have Yong Jung, who has been a good friend of Tennessee that does engineering reviews whenever there's floodway encroachments. He's going to be talking about an example as well. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Okay, so let's talk about earlier, we're going to talk about stream alterations or relocations and what that means specifically for floodplain administrators. So when we think about having an alteration or relocation of a watercourse, really what that means is that it's made to the channels of the river, a stream, or a drainage way. Most of the time when there's some sort of alteration or relocation, it's really focusing on improving drainage for the area. Maybe there's a relocation of the channel or trying to increase its flood carrying capacity. The definition of a watercourse is not necessarily defined in the NFIP regulations, but it really means the channel of a river, a stream, or drainage way, but not the adjacent overbank areas. If there's placement of fill in the overbank areas, but outside the channel, it's not considered an alteration or relocation of a watercourse. The overbank areas are addressed under the NFIP floodway requirement. So if there's any kind of improvement, any kind of change, if there's grading, if there's filling, if there's excavating of a floodway area, there has to be an engineering analysis, and that's part of the Tennessee No Rise guidance document. So watercourses include not only rivers and streams that are the source of flooding, but it also can be smaller streams, drainage ways, and ditches within the floodplain. So again, having a site plan is really important to show what's there on the ground, and even going out and doing an inspection to see what's going on the site. Because sometimes you can have unmapped streams that are going through a piece of property, and if someone is putting in a culvert or changing or altering it, that needs to be addressed. So again, having good over-the-counter consultation is important. So when we think about having an alteration or relocation, there's two requirements that must be done to maintain the flood carrying capacity. And the first, it has to have the same or greater capacity as the original watercourse. And then additionally, once it is altered, the capacity of the altered or relocated watercourse must be maintained over time. A lot of times you can see where a stream has been altered or relocated, and over time, Mother Nature will try to put the stream back to its original location. So again, whenever there's going to be a change made to a stream or a body of water, you want to make sure that that is maintained over time, and how the property owners or the community is going to address it is important when talking about these types of projects. Floodplain administrator duties. I can't stress this enough. A lot of times when a floodplain administrator has a question or there's a project coming into a community, the first thing that a lot of y'all do is you guys have anxiety and you get a little bit upset about it. But the thing is to sit down and talk with the applicant about what they're proposing to do. The next thing to do is to look at your local floodplain regulations to see what certain criteria need to be met. I met with a floodplain administrator about 2 weeks ago, and the floodplain administrator said, hey, what are our elevation requirements? I don't see anything within the document. And so I asked her to go get her resolution. And so we flipped a couple pages beyond where she was at. And she said, oh, I haven't read that far. So some of you guys, when you have a little bit of downtime, I would encourage you to sit down and kind of look at some of the different requirements, whether it's for recreational vehicles, whether it's for manufactured homes, floodway requirements for zone AE, zone A, unmapped streams, what a variance should be allowed, or what the process is. Because some of your communities, you guys have planning commissions, you have board of aldermen or county commissioners, and some of you guys have the 4-hour yearly training and you're not quite sure what topics to do. The National Flood Insurance Program would be an awesome topic to talk about, or hazard mitigation grants. There's a plethora of different topics that you guys can talk to your local community about. So if you haven't taken the time to sit down and read your regulations, or maybe you're not quite sure what's what, now would be a great time to do that. Because with this topic that we're having today, a lot of communities don't realize that if a water course is being altered or relocated, that there are certain standards that have to be met. So one of the first ones is to notify my office that a relocation or alteration is occurring. And once that does occur, copies of the documentation have to be provided to me, and also have to be provided to FEMA Region 4. So if there's any kind of adverse impact that's suspected, the neighboring community should also be able to voice concerns prior to any modification. So it's kind of like we talked about before with floodplain mapping, that if a project is being done along a stream, it doesn't just impact that site, it can impact other sites upstream or downstream from the property. So when you have an alteration of a water course, you want to make sure that you talk to the county and talk to neighboring municipalities that are upstream or downstream of where the relocation or alteration is going. Been here 7.5 years. I've never heard of anybody doing this, but we want to stress that what you do in your community, flooding in a community, doesn't just happen in one area. It goes way beyond a certain property or a certain water course. So you want to make sure that you talk to neighboring communities and make them aware of what's going on. Recently had an issue with a county in Middle Tennessee that was doing some filling in the floodplain and some grading in the floodway. So part of the property was in the county and part of it was in the city. And so we're just trying to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as what's going on. So, you know, making sure that you understand the location of the property, who has jurisdiction, is really important. So community responsibilities, if there is an alteration or relocation of a water course, a conditional letter of map revision should be sent to FEMA prior to construction. And this is to just ensure that FEMA recognizes the project for a map change when construction is proposed. I met with a community yesterday and they were talking about their flood insurance rate maps being done in 2008. And they're talking about how they wish they could have them redone. And so whenever someone is altering or relocating a water course, this is a good opportunity to revise your flood insurance rate maps so that it actually depicts what's currently going on in your community. Because if a stream has been altered or relocated, maybe some of the adjacent land area, maybe the floodplain is going to expand, maybe it's going to contract. But if you don't update that flood insurance rate map, some folks may have a smaller risk and others may increase. So you want to make sure that that's submitted to FEMA prior to make sure that all the standards are done. And then within 6 months of construction, the project engineer submits the engineering analysis showing the realignment and requests that FEMA updates the flood insurance rate maps and the flood insurance study profile to make sure. Because if that is done, let's say that it zigzags and now it's going straight, you want to have your flood insurance rate map show that relocation. And then you also want to make sure that your flood insurance study profile shows that as well. So there's future development in that area. that an adjacent landowner knows what the base flood elevation should be so that they can lower their flood risk by elevating their structure. If they're doing other types of projects, that they have the latest and greatest information within that project area. So just as an added bonus for you all, sometimes when we talk to different stakeholders, project engineers, applicants, they always ask, where did this regulation come from? And as we've talked about numerous times, FEMA has a code of federal regulations that documents all the program standards. So sometimes people say, well, it's just Amy Miller standards, whatever Amy says, that's what you have to do. And it's not my requirements, it's FEMA's requirements. So as part of this slide here, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but your local regulations actually reflect what's in the Code of Federal Regulations, because the Code of Federal Regulations kind of provide the backbone for the statewide model. And then we do have some higher regulatory requirements statewide for each participating community. So 60.3B6 essentially says that you have to notify my office prior to any alteration or relocation. And then B7 talks about making sure that the flood carrying capacity is maintained. So even though that's within your regulations, it is a federal requirement for all 22,000 plus communities that if there is any kind of alteration or relocation, that my office is notified, adjacent communities are affected or notified, and then making sure that the water course is going to be maintained. I think that's something that's a little bit deficient in some of the applications that we have seen statewide, is that it's not always detailed how it's going to be maintained. Because sometimes you guys can think about water courses in your communities where the stream bank has eroded and it needs to be stabilized. Same sort of thing with this. If you're going to alter or relocate it, how are you going to maintain that the flood carrying capacity is going to stay throughout time, and how it's going to be monitored and maintained over the course of time is really important. So for carrying capacity, the National Flood Insurance Program, again, has to be applied to all water courses that are in a mapped floodplain. A lot of times we see work that's done in a Zone A for rural communities where no base flood elevations have been provided by FEMA. And requirements are particularly important because if there are no floodways designated and no other requirements that would preserve the flood capacity to maintain those floodwaters. So if you have a Zone A stream, there's going to have to be additional work done by a surveyor to survey the area to delineate where the floodway would be, that main channel, and then doing elevations to see the impact of the relocation or alteration, and then also addressing flood carrying capacity. So sometimes you can have a Zone A stream going to be altered or relocated, and then you can have additional technical data that can maybe take that from a Zone A to a Zone AE with some additional information that can make additional development in the area better because you have that detailed information. So failure to maintain carrying capacity, it can create numerous flood problems. A lot of times, especially since COVID has started, I'm the angry citizen hotline. A lot of people will sit at home and they will watch their neighbors and they will see that they're doing different types of activities in the floodplain, whether permitted or unpermitted, and they'll call my office and say, hey, my neighbor's putting fill near the stream bank, or my neighbor's putting fill on the lot. You know, every day it's a different phone call with a different issue. So again, you want to make sure that with this, that it's going to be maintained. Because one thing that we talked about yesterday with a county mayor was talking about subdivision regulations and especially stormwater management. One thing that I always ask whenever I see a major subdivision that's in the floodplain, the question is a culvert going to protect for the 1% annual chance of flood? A lot of times when you guys get various development packages or projects, stormwater management is really important, because if it's not going to protect to the 1% annual chance of flooding, then what can happen is when you have a flash flood event, if it's only protecting for the 10-year storm event, 50-year, when you have a flash flood event, folks are going to experience flooding in their backyard or potentially in the subdivision or their homes. So when you have chronic flooding and you have repetitive flood losses, it can become costly. And some communities may have a stormwater management fee, but if it's not really rated at a proper amount, you can have money set aside for that, but it's really no pun intended, it's a drop in the bucket because it's not going to be able to keep up with development over time and maintenance and different issues. So you want to make sure that when you're having a major subdivision coming in your area, whether it's in the floodplain or whether it's not, you want to make sure that the engineer addresses and you want to know what level of protection that culvert or pipe is going to be, especially for industrial areas or subdivision over time. Because I met with an individual last Friday and we were talking about a major subdivision being near a Walmart, and when it rains, some of that water kind of drifts from the retention ponds of Walmart into the subdivision, and their culverts and pipes don't address all that stormwater over time. So it makes it really difficult. So when we think about Zone A, Zone AE, and alterations, Zone AE with a floodway, again, you want to have requirements continue to apply to the channel of the river or the stream. The floodway designation will prevent encroachments in the floodplain. It'll cause more than a 1 foot increase in the flood stage. And again, the 1 foot is part of the Code of Federal Regulations. If there's anything over a foot and there's insurable structures and you submit that engineering analysis to FEMA as a conditional letter of map revision, they will deny it. So that's part of those regulations right there. And again, notifying my office and making sure that you maintain the flood carrying capacity. Again, you want to make sure that it applies to the water courses and to smaller tributary streams, drainage ways within the floodplain. And you want to make sure that it doesn't produce additional flooding in areas as we talked about earlier. So for Zone A streams, the analysis can be as simple as a community engineer reviewing the proposal. But again, I would caution that if you have a proposal that's submitted, that it be submitted to my office. Unfortunately, we've had over probably 110 submittals. We have not had a complete application package. We have not had a complete and correct submittal. So again, to kind of take some of that liability off local communities, engineering reviews as part of my office is always available to every single community because we want it to be compliant. Because if it isn't compliant, there could potentially be a lawsuit, whether it be from the project engineer or to the local community not enforcing the regulations. So again, whether it's Zone AE, Zone A, or unmapped streams, you want to make sure that there's an engineering analysis with this when there's an alteration or relocation. And then making sure that the channel size and the cross sections are big and the channel is straight as the original water course. And if there are smooth hydraulic transitions into and out of the altered or relocation portion of the water course. And that's really important because you want to make sure it's smooth so when you have the entry and the exit of floodwaters that you're not causing additional flooding to adjacent properties. And then making sure that the sides and bottoms are the same or similar materials to the original water course. And then looking at the roughness coefficient. So you kind of think about, is it smooth or is it rocky or is there sedimentation or different things? A sandbar that gets in that area. You want to make sure that it addresses those issues so that the flow, the carrying capacity can go from point A to point B. And it does have to be done by a registered engineer. So a non-man-made water course, sometimes an artificial condition is created and you can have erosion of the banks and sedimentation could occur. And then that decreases the capacity of the channel to carry flood flows. And sometimes you'll see where someone altered it and then you can see over time Mother Nature tries to meander it to return to the old location. And vegetation can grow, choking the area. And any benefits that were done through the original project can be lost, and then you can have flood hazards increase. Now, a lot of times whenever there's a flood event, one of the first things I always hear from folks is, well, just go in and just clear out all the vegetation in the stream bank, allow the water to go from point A to point B unobstructed. And we all know that TDEC will not issue those sort of permits for that type of activity. So you want to try to work with nature and make sure that when a project is being proposed, that these particular issues are addressed. So riparian management is fundamental for supporting proper stream corridor function and to make sure it's a fully functioning stream. So this picture here is near and dear because this is a picture from back home. It's cows in the stream. And so my agricultural education degree would say that the farmer needs to have a conservation plan to make sure that the cows aren't in the stream. But again, there's some other things that when you're looking at riparian management, if there's adjacent agricultural operations that are in there, how is that going to affect alteration or relocation of a stream? Livestock grazing practices, maybe you have fences up so far from the stream, you know, like farm fence, to make sure that the cattle can't graze clear to the stream bank. Forest harvesting practices. One time I was in a community in East Tennessee. I was driving through a floodplain and all of a sudden the guy hemmed me in, so I couldn't back up, I couldn't leave, and he said, hey, there's this issue where they're harvesting trees. Every time it floods, there's a mud flow that comes towards my house. I'm having issues. So again, you want to make sure that when people are harvesting trees, and let's say it's on steep slopes, how are they going to address some flooding and mudslides that could potentially occur? Road building and then urbanization all affect riparian management as far as making sure that a stream functions. So again, as Tennessee continues to develop, these will continue to be issues, especially urbanization, road building, making sure that sites are reasonably safe from flooding, making sure that utilities are flood-proof, water resistant, and that you don't have flooding accumulate in various types of utilities is really important. Data compilation is really important when engineering analysis are being done, because the project engineer is going to have to collect existing available data as far as current conditions, including stream flows. Some streams have gauges, so you know what the stream flow is, others do not. So again, obtaining that information is really important. Water diversion, water quality data, flow frequency data, biologic inventories, working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to know if there's any kind of endangered species, if you're going to be altering or relocating, and how that affects vegetation and animals in the area and aquatic life. And then have aerial imagery, soil information, and elevation data. We're really fortunate in Tennessee to have LIDAR data done for the state. I believe West Tennessee is going to be done soon, so we will have the whole state with LIDAR data. If you need that information, you can go to the state of Tennessee STS GIS website, or just Google Tennessee LIDAR data to be able to obtain that if you're working with someone that's going to be doing a project in your local community. Historic information. The flood insurance study guide for each community does have historic information as far as flood events that have happened in each individual community. So you want to make sure that historic data is implemented into a project to make sure that you promote the historic condition if that's accurate. If you guys were ever to go to Ohio State, there's Mirror Lake. It used to be just a round kind of circular lake, and then they decided to go in there and reconfigure it, realign it back to its historic condition, so that when there's a flood event, the stream and the pond are back to how it was a long time ago, and then making sure that the elements that lead to the degradation have been alleviated. So again, kind of understanding the impacts of the stream, some of the issues that it has, and making sure that you put that in the project is really important. So now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, and he's going to talk about a project that he did recently.
Great, thanks, Amy. I don't believe I can activate the slides, so Amy, I may have to rely on you to forward for me. Is that okay?
Totally fine.
Great. Well, hey everybody, my name is Patrick McMahon. I'm an engineer at Civil and Environmental Consultants in Knoxville. We've got offices in Knoxville and Nashville. A lot of you probably work with Steve, Casey, and Jeff Shaver. Today I'm here to talk to you about a project that was done in a Zone A, a stream relocation done in a Zone A. I'd also like to recognize some other engineers who worked on this project at SNME. Ken Berry and Brent Wood. This was an SNME project. Completed. The design was done, gosh, it's been a little while now, maybe a year and a half ago. The owner of the project is Res, and we will not talk about what county this is in necessarily. They were going through a period of transition. We'll get through that here in just a minute, but it was a full relocation to stream in a Zone A. So Amy, go ahead and advance us there. Thank you. So, when you get into these projects, the first thing is just due diligence, getting together a meaningful and complete proposal. And from the engineer's standpoint, one of the first things we're going to do is go and look at the flood damage prevention resolution or ordinance in that county or municipality and make sure we understand how it is set up. There is the blanket ordinance that you can adopt that has, all the requirements you would need to address to be in compliance with the NFIP program. Some communities adopt more stringent requirements, and then there are some gray areas where communities will do a few, some different things with their program to meet their needs in the community. And so we first want to get really intimately familiar with that information. And the second order of business is to contact the floodplain administrator, who is a critical piece to the NFIP program and process whenever we're working in floodplains. So we want to get involved with the floodplain administrator very early and start talking about the project. In this particular instance, that is immediately we were running into some challenges. Amy, you can go ahead and advance it one. We got into the flood damage prevention resolution and said, okay, great, it's the county planner that we need to be talking to. So we reach out to the county planner, and we're not getting any responses, and it come to find out, unfortunately, the county planner had recently and suddenly passed away due to natural causes, and the county was a little bit in a loss for reassigning the responsibilities of the county planner. Of course, we've got a project that needs to move forward, and we're doing our best by the client to keep advancing the project. So Amy, go ahead and advance us one more. So unfortunately, we ran into a situation where nobody really knew who was in charge at that period. Like I said, it was a period of transition. It was, we were told to contact the E911 director. We were told that the planning responsibilities had been subbed out to a private group. We contacted them. They said, no, that's not our responsibility. So we kind of got in this circle and said, we're going to have to look for outside help, because we do not want to complete the project without going through these steps, because it's the county's NFIP program that is really in peril if we were to run afoul of it. And that's, as an engineer, we have a responsibility to the community to make sure that that program is healthy. Go ahead and advance it another. Okay, so just a general note going into any kind of stream relocation in a Zone A, when you're scoping the project, it is so critical to prepare and educate the client, the owner of the project. We as engineers work quite a bit with the NFIP program and are very familiar with it. They may not have ever heard of it, and it can be a very important element of the project. So there's an element of education there. In this instance, a relocation in Zone A was new territory for me personally, and it turns out I was not the only one. When we got into needing to find the floodplain administrator, we had to default to the state, who helped out and said we will review this on their behalf because they're in transition, which is truly unusual. Usually that is the responsibility of the floodplain administrator, and there's good reasons for that. So when you're going through these projects in the Zone A, there's a possibility that you've got, you're going to be working with FEMA to meet floodplain criteria. compliance criteria, and that's dependent on a few things on the project. I'll point out that CFR 60.3b does not specifically spell out you need to do a CLOMAR, but it also does not excuse it as potentially being the appropriate action. So all projects are unique in the setting that they're in, and you need to work through the process to see what's involved. In this instance, we did certainly have to reach out to TEMA, and we're grateful to Amy and Yong by extension for acting in that role and helping us move the project forward without imperiling the county's program. All right, go ahead, Amy. All right, I'll go back to and Amy, I'll be parroting some of the stuff you mentioned earlier. You know, as we're trying to work through this, what are the requirements we're going to have to meet? So immediately we're aware by reviewing the NFIP program, and I'll say also on this project, the ordinance was not a resolution had not been fully adopted by the county at that time, I believe. So we were kind of operating again in an in-between state. But we know for sure by looking at the federal regulations that we've got to notify adjacent communities if there's an impact, and we're relocating. We need to notify the state office and submit copies of those notifications to FEMA. And we definitely have to maintain the flood carrying capacity. In this case, we're talking about stream restoration, which generally is a good thing for flood resiliency. So, but again, we need to make sure we address that and spell it out clearly in the application documents. Go ahead, Amy. Okay, I'll call your attention to a couple other, or at least one other piece of federal regulation that affects how floodplains are managed. And this is for NFIP communities, which most folks on the phone are. You do have a responsibility as the NFIP community to keep your maps up to date. It says here in 65.3, as soon as practicable, but no later than 6 months from the date of information being available. This is any information that has significant influence. And I put significant in quotes because that is a gray area as well, but we'll say significant being more than a foot perhaps in a zone A. But they've got 6 months to notify FEMA and get the maps updated. The model ordinance that TEMA has for the communities can adopt, some have adopted a modification, has a bit of text in there under section C saying that any relocation of a water course requires data analysis sent to FEMA within 6 months. So depends on where you're located, how things are interpreted, but and I believe, and Amy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 65.3 was sort of interpreted to create that requirement in the model ordinance. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. Oh. What'd you say, Amy? All right.
I was just agreeing with you.
Okay. All right, let's go on to the next one. Thank you. Okay, so kind of some easy takeaways. If you are relocating a stream in a zone A, and this is kind of what we learned through this process, the things you are going to have to do for sure, without question, is a hydraulic analysis for existing proposed conditions, and that rise, if you have one, has to be less than a foot. You have to submit this information to the local floodplain administrator for review and approval as part of the floodplain development permit process. And I say comment/approval, they're not going to approve it until they're pleased that it checks all the boxes it needs to check, and that's our responsibility to get that done. And then communication and verification for flood carrying capacity. Those are two different things. You want to notify adjacent communities if you've got a significant impact, which it wasn't in this instance, but I could imagine, say, a zone A project that, while it does not cause more than a 1 foot rise in the base flood elevation, maybe it causes several acres of sub 1 foot flooding. That would be considered significant, I believe, particularly if it's encroaching on roads or homes. Even though it's less than 1 foot, it's significant, and you would want to notify the adjacent communities. I also don't think that would be a very sound project because you probably wouldn't want to be impacting structures or roads. So unlikely you'd find yourself in that boat. But the other things you need to be aware of, it's possible that you'll need to do a letter of map revision within the next 6 months. Depends on local ordinance and the interpretation and significance of any changes that the map features. There may be additional requirements. The floodplain administrator is actually a pretty strong position and has a lot of latitude to require additional information as they see fit. All right, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so in this instance, because the floodplain administrator position was temporarily vacant, as I said, Amy stepped in and said, we will act on their behalf. And so we developed a plan because this was the first time we worked on a Zone A relocation, and it turns out that was the first one Amy had worked on as well. So we were on both sides of the fence trying to make sure we did everything correctly. So the plan we developed was, we're going to develop an existing and proposed hydrologic analysis and report. We knew what the alignment generally was of the stream we wanted to relocate. Flooding was pretty much valley controlled. And then our cross sections, because the design was moving forward with the permitting, we decided to use all riffle cross sections within the banks to be conservative. And we needed to show that, or we needed the analysis to demonstrate that our floodplain rise was less than a foot in order to, between existing and proposed based on those models. And if it wasn't, we either needed to revise the design or move on with a CLOMAR. And in the plan we developed, the state said, the owner and the designer to follow the project with a LOMAR after construction, which is a reasonable request that they made on behalf of the county, and that was the requirement that was agreed to. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so we went through 3 rounds of review. There were some easy comments to address, and some we weren't aware of until we got into it that we were needing to do this. One, we had to extend the analysis down to the next confluence in the Zone A, which was not terribly far downstream, so that was not a big deal. Sometimes the results in your floodplain mapping, you'll get these tables that say, hey, here's your flooded width, and that may not match what's shown on your maps. That can be an indicator that something's wrong. It can also be caused by dry areas in your cross section. In this case, we had some of those. So while it appeared to be a discrepancy in the model and the results and the mapping, it was not. It was explainable. So we worked through that. Some additional survey was asked for, which is a reasonable request. So we tidied up the survey, and then some minor revisions to figures. Let's go on to 25. So in the end, oops, roll back one. There you go. In the end, we got a nice letter from Amy and said, we've reviewed it. You've met all the requirements of Code of Federal Regulations. And while Amy cannot issue that floodplain development permit, she can say that the county should have no reason not to, based on the FEMA requirements. So we got through that hurdle on the project. And Amy, I'll let you go to the next one. I believe this is the last slide. The project has not been constructed yet, and I don't have a time frame other than sometime soon. It is advertised by the owner on their website, but does not have yet a construction date. So we're going to keep an eye on that. Some takeaway points: educate and inform your client, and then as the floodplain administrator, you're going to be getting contacted by engineers at the start of these projects. You should be getting contacted, and use your engineers as resources. We do this work day in and day out. I know a lot of you probably do 50 other things other than being a floodplain administrator for your community. So if you have questions, Amy's an excellent resource, and so is your engineering community. You want to establish your compliance criteria at the proposal stage. You do not want to get halfway through a design and be surprised that, well, we're going to have to do a completely different or go down a completely different path for our floodplain permit than what we thought. You want to know that up front. You want to budget sufficient time and money for your study. If you've been through a FEMA review of a flood study, you know it is not a minor event. You need to be provide very specific and detailed information, and they will ask specific and detailed questions, and you will have to respond to them. If you're submitting things to the local floodplain administrator, you should be submitting things that are at that same level of effort and documentation. So treat it like you're submitting it to FEMA when you give this report to the local floodplain administrator. That includes a detailed narrative, your figures, make sure you got signed and sealed survey data, design files, and your modeling files. And I'll reiterate that this is the health of the county's NFIP program that's really at stake. Engineering is one of the few services where the customer is not always right. We have a duty and responsibility to the public. As a matter of fact, that goes to the National Society of Professional Engineers Fundamental Canon 1 is hold paramount the safety and health and welfare of the public. So we are here for the NFIP community. And I'll also say at the end of the day, the NFIP program is an insurance program, and they are in the game of evaluating risk to life and property. Stream restoration projects are generally benefits to the community, and we want to view them in that light, but that doesn't make them immune from having to move through this system, this process to make sure that the county's programs are held and well cared for. So with that, I will turn it over to Yong, and thank you, Amy.
Good morning, all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. My name is Yong Jung. I'm with AECOM, and we're the study contractor for the state of Tennessee for the engineering review. And Amy, you can actually go to the detail study slide. I can cover this MT2 form at the end. Can you advance next slide or more? Okay, so Amy covers really well on the topic as a like state NFIP NFIP's coordinator standpoints, and Patrick covers the topic from the engineering standpoints, and so I'm doing the FEMA reviewing stuff for all my professions. So let me like go through this topic from the FEMA reviewer standpoints. So the detailed study stream, which is Zone AE or Zone AE with the floodway on your flood insurance rate map, the community adopt these detailed studies in their ordinance, so they are the basis of your regulations. And these detailed study stream has several related data components that shows the stream stations. So if you imagine, like any alteration or relocation projects, what's the first thing come into your mind? I think the shape of the stream should be the, the first thing that come into your mind probably, because it actually changed the shape of the streams. And that's actually affecting the stream station values. So let's, go through some of the components. So in your flood insurance study report, there are profiles for all detailed study stream, which shows the elevations as well as the stream stations. And then floodway data tables for all the letter cross section for the detailed study stream with the floodway. That shows the floodway information, but it also shows the station value as well. And if you look at the FEMA FOM database, there's additional layers, GIS layer, which called S profile baseline, which shows the shape of the stream. And then, there's the S cross section shape out, which shows all the model cross sections that has the elevations and the station value. So any alteration to the water course will change the stream station value. Therefore, it need to update the FEMA study for these detailed study. So no rise option is available for these cases and need to submit for the CLOMAR to the FEMA. Next slide. So if you look at the MT2 form, the MT2 form number 1 is basically covering the overview and concurrence form. And if you look at the section 5, it actually the first thing that you can check is the physical changes, and a stream alteration and a relocation project is basically fall into that category. And so that's the first indication you need to submit this the alteration and relocation project to the FEMA as a CLOMAR. And next slide. And next one is the form number 3, river and structure form. And if you look at it, the section B, they're talking about the channelizations. So they, basically, if you look at the instruction of that MT2 form, basically they describe it as if there's any changes or any alterations that you made on the stream channels, you have to basically fill out this form with the, attach the plan that the certified by the register professional engineers. So that's the requirement for all the detailed study streams. So like Patrick mentioned, approximate streams may not require this CLOMAR process, but all the detailed study streams, and especially for the detailed study streams with a floodway, require the CLOMAR process for all the alteration and relocation projects. I think that's all I have, Amy. Thanks.
Thanks, Yong. All right, so we have some final thoughts that we want to share with you guys today. So again, when you're thinking about having a development project in your community, you want to make sure that you require a site plan that shows existing and proposed development with elevations. Sometimes there may be an unmapped stream, so you may have to go out and do a site visit to make sure that everything is being addressed. And then for Zone AE, with and without floodways, Zone A and unmapped streams need to have an engineering analysis. So Patrick did a really good job of talking about some of the components he had to do for Zone A. Yong and I have the Tennessee No Rise guidance document that has additional information for what an engineering analysis looks like. Sometimes communities will say, or developers will say, well, I got an ARAP permit, so I'm good. No, you're not. That does not fulfill the NFIP regulations within your model resolution or ordinance. So if someone says that they got the TDEC permit, that does not fulfill floodplain management requirements. So again, you want to pump the brakes and say, hey, you need to do an analysis and give us more detailed information. And as always, if you guys have a question or concern, please call me. As I said to someone last week, if you have an issue or a problem, if you don't tell me, I'm not going to know. So if you have a development that's coming in your community and it's large and complicated or complex, and you just need an extra set of eyes and ears to kind of look at things and make sure that floodplain management compliance and uniformity is being done, just let me know. So with that, we're going to open it up to questions.
This is Carrie Williamson with the Tennessee Valley Authority. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for the presentations today. This is very helpful. It's not quite, well, it is an alteration, but I'm with the Tennessee Valley Authority, and we're looking at a couple of projects here in the last, I don't know, year or so, where people are contemplating removing low-head dams in some streams to improve public safety. Those hydraulic rollers are deadly, so people are looking at removing those. Have you all dealt with any of those type projects in other areas of the state? And if so, what are you seeing that works, and what advice would you give for somebody embarking on one of these? Thank you.
Good morning, Carrie. Unfortunately, I don't like the answer I'm about to say, but we have not been contacted by any community statewide with this issue at all.
I've run into it a bit in other states, and I'll say that you probably want to get FEMA Region 4 involved. And Amy, you can jump in here if I'm off base. But I have been a part of projects where if there is a legit concern for life and safety, and I would say those hazard dams, as soon as there's a willingness to get rid of them, let's get rid of them and update the maps. You know, that shouldn't be a stumbling block. Now, I don't have the power to pull those switches, but I have been a part of projects where FEMA has come and said, go fix it, and we'll update the maps on the back end because this is important.
Okay, thank you. I have heard in the last couple of years that there's different federal agencies have different missions and authorities, and sometimes they conflict. And what I have heard in the past was about, and thank you for that answer, Patrick. Somebody wants to remove a dam, not necessarily a low head dam, and this is more in the Pacific Northwest to restore functionality to the stream so the salmon can migrate upstream and reproduce. But removing a dam makes things better for one federal agency, but then worse for another. And I know FEMA's overall has had a kind of had a time with how do we make this work. So okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure. And Carrie, I'll bring up also for the dams that aren't you know, a hazard to life and safety, and there are those. They're, you know, tall, they're not particularly dangerous, but people want to remove them. A lot of times those projects are funded by nonprofits or, you know, entities without deep pockets, and you know, it takes a lot of engineering analysis and dollars to move things through the NFIP program. And I find that a lot of times that's a stumbling block for projects that would otherwise be great candidates for, you know, dam removal. So I'll just voice it out there. It would be really great if we could find a way to tap, you know, either federal resources or other dollars to somehow offset that cost for these nonprofits and smaller entities who can help bring the community together to a point where they're ready to remove these structures, but there needs to be enough funding there to fund the engineering to keep, you know, that would be a definite CLOMAR-LOMAR scenario if it's on a floodway. Amy, it looks like we had a question from Tom. I saw it pop up for a second.
Yeah, I just saw it. Okay, I'll give you an A+ for a really long question. You can't transfer the Zone A information over or the Zone AE information over to the Zone A. So wherever you have a detailed study, and then let's say you have that white line and it stops, and then all of a sudden you have the Zone A on your map. If you have a project where it's going into both zones, the project engineer would start with the Zone AE information, and then they would have to have a surveyor come out and do a survey and figure out what the elevations would be where the floodway is delineated, and get more technical data for that Zone A. But you can't just take one and then transfer it over to the other. Now, the engineer can obtain an engineering analysis from FEMA, and there may be some additional information, but we've kind of it's been hit and miss as far as that information. Because sometimes people ask Yong, like, hey, is there anything else that FEMA would have for that? So
And sometimes, yes, and sometimes Zone A stream has the model behind it, and you can obtain those model to retrieve the elevations.
Yeah, so I think the important thing is if you have an engineer that's working on a site, the first thing they need to do is contact FEMA and request the FIS profile and the engineering models, and then making sure that they have detailed information as far as what area they need from FEMA, because sometimes they'll submit that data to FEMA and it's not real clear what they're looking for, or they get a little confused, or the maps are a little bit confusing. So again, having detailed information helps. Does anybody else have any questions? Don't be shy. Okay, Tom, that's a good answer. That's the right answer. I think what we'll do is we will wrap up this webinar. I want to give a special thank you to Patrick and Yong for helping out today. You guys were fabulous, did a great job as always. Next month, we're going to be having a webinar on CRS, Community Rating System, and why a community should join. So if you guys have flirted with the idea of possibly joining that program, we'll be talking about that next month. So hope you all have a happy Thanksgiving. Hope you're able to stay healthy and happy and be with your loved ones, and take time to thank God for all your blessings in your life. Thank you.